And it's over to you, Michelle.
Great. Thank you very much. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're on the traditional territory of the Comox First Nation, and we are thankful for the opportunity to work with their families and to teach their children. And I'd like to welcome everyone to the Education Committee meeting for February the 9th, 2021. And I'd like to welcome all of the trustees, all of our senior administrative team and representatives here today from DPAC and IEC and our Principal Vice Principal Association. And I would like to welcome Esther Shatz, our Director of Instruction Student Services, and Karma Taiji. Oh, see, I even practiced. Taiji. Did I get it? Taiji.
Yeah.
Taiji to our meeting. And they're going to be speaking with us tonight regarding our SOGI policy and on mental health.
Thank you, Michelle. I would just like to start. Karma and I have split up the evening. Karma will talk about SOGI and I will talk about mental health. I'd just like to say, to introduce Karma to you. Karma is the Vice Principal of Isfeld, one of our senior secondary schools, and she has been the co-district partner around SOGI for the last 3 years. And so in that vein, I have asked her to help with this presentation tonight, and she actually, in how she does, took off with it. And so we'll start now, Karma, and talk about SOGI and what SOGI means to our school district.
Thank you, Esther. So I practiced this earlier, and I'm very pleased to be here to speak with you all tonight. So thank you very much for having me. I practiced the sharing of the screen with Jeff earlier, so let's see how it goes. All right, can you see the PowerPoint?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So SOGI, or sexual orientation, gender identity, is what I'm going to talk about today. Is a little bit about some of the definitions behind it, why it is a focus area, and why it's an overarching idea. I will turn it over briefly as well to Esther, who will go through the history of the SOGI policy in School District 71. And I'll go through some of highlights of the policy just to point out some of the things that stood out for me. I'll also touch a little bit on research that I did when I was doing my master's program on a sense of belonging for students under a SOGI policy. And if you have any questions, just ask them at any time. And if you need clarification, please also ask. So SOGI is not a curriculum. And I think a lot of people start there and say it has to do with curriculum, it's resources, it's that kind of thing. So I just want to separate a little bit, looking at some of the definitions. So SOGI stands for sexual orientation and gender identity. And we look at sexual orientation and gender identity on traditionally on a spectrum, but it actually could be seen in sort of a circular diagram with people falling in different places at different times in terms of their sexual orientation and gender identity. SOGI is not a curriculum, but it's a way of being that impacts all of our actions in a district. It is a set of principles that guide how we do things in every aspect of our district, and it's inclusive. The underlying theme is that everyone belongs, and this ties into a number of other policies that we have, but also just our belief that diversity and inclusion are a big part of our district and of education. So a SOGI policy is clear statements about the rights and responsibilities of all community members regarding inclusion. Whereas SOGI 123, which you may have heard of before, is ministry supported resources to support SOGI inclusive school districts. Okay, so the policy is different from SOGI 123. Which is resource-based, and the policy is statements about rights and responsibilities. A lot of the language in the SOGI policy, and when we talk about SOGI, has to do with LGBTQ+, or sometimes people say LGBT squared, QA1. And this stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, two-spirit, queer, questioning. And it's supposed to be inclusive of all non-heterosexual, non-gender conforming, non-heteronormative conforming identities. A GSA, and I'll talk a little bit about this as well, is a gay straight alliance. Traditionally, it's been called that. And a number of districts now call it a gender sexuality alliance. And this is a club that can take on different meanings depending on the school it's in, but traditionally has meant students coming together to provide a space of belonging for students who are LGBTQ+ or non. And or for educational purposes. In our district, you will mostly hear of a GSA called a QSA or a QAC. At our school, it's called. And this stands for Queer Straight Alliance or Queer Alliance Club. And this is chosen a lot of the time by students as being more inclusive. A rainbow diversity club is what you might hear at an elementary school, and these are inclusion clubs. And elementary schools tend to take on more of a diverse range and not mention the sexuality or gender portion of it. And it may take on all different types of inclusion. So a big question is, why SOGI inclusive focus? Why do we focus on making sure that we're specific to this type of diversity or inclusion? Well, the statistics say that a large portion of our student body identifies as part of a community, an LGBTQ+ community. So 15% of male and 23% of female BC high school students identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, asexual, or not exclusively heterosexual. And 1% of BC high school students identify as transgender and 5% as two-spirit. And this is taken from 2014 study. Those numbers could be higher now, and it depends as well on the district. Why else do we focus on SOGI? Well, with LGBTQ+ youth, there is a greater risk for suicide, eating disorders, depression, absenteeism, tardiness, lower graduation rates, homelessness, and bullying. The risk factors are very concerning for LGBTQ+ youth, and they're compounded when they're combined with other identity factors such as ethnicity, poverty, and family rejection. Another thing that we look at is inclusivity. SOGI is just one more aspect of a school district's discussion around diversity and inclusion. We also look at the Human Rights Code, and I'll go over that a little bit in a second. And we also look at core competencies. So this ties in a little bit with how we interact with our students and their reflection on who they are. So in particular, this has to do with the personal and social core competency. And that has to do with the ability of students that relate to a student's identity in the world, both as individuals and as members of their community and society. So the personal and social competency encompasses the ability students need to thrive as individuals, to understand and care about themselves and others, and to find and achieve their purpose in the world. We also look at this because of a number of research studies that have been done. And in particular, there was one done by Dr. Elizabeth Sawick from UBC, and which has to do with being proactive versus reactive. So in this study, what the researchers found was that GSAs, so gay straight alliances, and anti-homophobia policies in schools can lead to fewer suicide attempts, better motivation at school, less depression, and less underage drinking amongst all students. So this doesn't just impact LGBTQ+ students, this impacts our entire community. And so what they found in this study is that districts that had the GSA plus these anti-homophobia policies in place for 3 or more years were finding this impact amongst all of their students. In Canada, there's 2 different documents that we look at, rights or laws. So the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms of 1982 states that every individual is equal before and under the law and has the right to the equal protection and equal benefit of the law without discrimination, which in 1995 was ruled at the Supreme Court of Canada to include sexual orientation as a prohibited basis of discrimination. The Canadian Human Rights Act of 1977 protects people in Canada from discrimination. In 1996, it was amended to specifically include sexual orientation as one of the prohibitive grounds of discrimination. And in 2017, the federal government amended the act to include gender identity and gender expression as prohibited grounds of discrimination. So at this point, having taken into consideration all of these things and how they impact why we look at SOGI and being inclusive and having a SOGI policy, I'm going to look at turn it over to Esther to talk about the history of SOGI in School District 71. And Esther, I've put it onto 2 slides, so as you move through, I'll move on to the next one. Esther, you're muted, I believe.
Thank you. If we look at this timeline, we can see that our board adopted an extended sexual orientation and gender identity policy in 2011. Our policy was one of the early SOGI policies in the BC educational system. 5 years later, in 2016, Mike Bernier, Minister of Education, announced that all schools had to provide protections for LGBTQ+ youth and provide guidelines for school district policy. So then in 2016, we attended a provincial SOGI summit and then joined the SOGI network. We received a grant from RBC to support our SOGI initiatives. We used those funds for district training of our SOGI reps. Karma presented her thesis looking at LGBTQ+ youth and services and of belonging, sense of belonging to the board. and we began to review our policy, update it, and redraft it with the guidance from the ministry. In 2017, our board unanimously adopted the redrafted SOGI policy. Our community supports SOGI and helps ratify our policy. We have monthly SOGI meetings. They were established for all island school districts. And in 2018, Karma joined me as the district SOGI rep. I think the thing that's important about our history and about our policy is that the policy is meant to be a living document, and that as we learn more about SOGI, more about inclusivity, more about the LGBTQ plus community, we will adopt our policy to be current.
Thank you, Esther. And I think something also very significant is that our district was one of the first in BC to have a SOGI policy, inclusive policy. And now almost all school districts have a policy. So what is happening around our district? What sort of initiatives are there to support the SOGI policy? Well, we're part of this island network. And what that means is that Esther and I are the district SOGI reps. We then have SOGI reps at each school. And so we will meet with them, and then we will go to an island-based network meeting. We also have GSAs at all of our secondary and alternative schools in the Valley. We have teacher sponsors for each of these GSAs. We have district GSA sessions where all of the GSAs from the high schools and alternative schools come together. Under this, under the COVID situation, we are seeing that we're trying to do that online. We have anti-bullying weeks at the schools, gender neutral washrooms, pride flags and stickers. We have school-based initiatives such as at Vanier, the students were talking to the staff at a staff meeting about GSAs and the importance of that. We have elementary resources and kits through our Learning Resource Center. We see teachers weaving SOGI concepts into the curriculum. We have training for our SOGI reps. So the most recent one was on gender affirming care for our students. We have an Island GSA Summit, and that is going to be new this year. So all of the network around SOGI 123 will come together for an online Zoom summit. And that's the first time. It's very exciting. Our district is currently looking at having a SOGI Film Fest for students all across the district. And we are in a safe space partnership with the RCMP. So you'll see signs at all of the schools saying that this is a safe place for LGBTQ plus people. I just put in this little bit of artwork. This is from one of the students saying, "We're here and queer, we're not invisible. We're all different colors." And this is a quote from that student. "I feel like the GSA is really my home in school because that's where I can bring up my ideas and just be somewhere I feel included." And then another initiative, this one was at one of the high schools. It was a day of silence, and it was a pledge of solidarity to acknowledge how our attitudes and actions impact those around us. So I just wanted to put in a couple of examples so you could see what's happening. I have a short video here, and I hope it works. And it's just from SOGI 123. It's a good resource, and it's specifically about policies and procedures and how they impact a school district.
I I think the value for the SOGI 123 campaign for educators is many. I think it provides the educators, the administrators, the districts with the tools to develop policies, which is really critical in terms of creating that type of environment where it's inclusive.
Without standalone policies explicitly referencing lesbian, gay, trans, and other members of the LGBTQ community, it's too easy just to gloss things over when school districts or schools retreat to simply talking about bullying.
Our research has really been looking over the last years about how policies and how different practices in schools actually can help young people in schools. Not just anti-bullying, but also policies that set up how schools welcome and celebrate people of diverse orientations and gender identities. And what we found here in British Columbia has been really interesting. Compared to school districts that don't have inclusive policies, those that have LGBTQ inclusive policies show lower levels of discrimination, lower levels of problems because of alcohol or drug use, and lower rates of suicidal thoughts and suicide attempts, not just among sexual minority youth, but actually among straight youth as well. A lot of times, the sort of homophobic or transphobic or biphobic bullying is focused around the perception that people aren't fitting sort of the gender norms. And the reality is that if you're being bullied because people think you're gay, you're still being bullied, and that has those negative consequences. Policies are a great start. How do we actually create inclusion for the diverse range of young people across gender, across sexuality, across ethnicity, and the variety of diversity that we see in schools?
The development of our inclusion policy here in Nanaimo Ladysmith Public Schools has been an evolution. We had difficulty getting people to know that it existed. We decided that really we needed an inclusion policy so that we could protect the rights of all of our minority groups, visible or invisible. And that gave us the teeth to do the important work around SOGI.
We decided that we needed a gender-neutral washroom. Our school has been accommodating for students who required separate bathroom facilities, but we found that they were inadequate. I didn't actually make action towards this until the QSA's own students came forward and said, we need to get a gender-neutral washroom here at the school. So it was actually based on their actions. As of September this year, we will now have our first multi-user gender-neutral washroom installed and ready for use for all of our students at our school.
We realized early on that not all of our schools had GSA, so not all of our students had that ability to connect with a safe adult within their building. So with the blessing of the school district, we decided that we would host our own GSA at the school board office. It has been such a wonderful experience for me personally, but I know for the kids as well. It was a way for us to provide resources and safe adults for them to talk to. I always remember the first time they walked in the door and realized they weren't the only kids. And you know, the success story is we have between 40 and 60 kids that are able to come to our district GSA on a regular basis, and it's been phenomenal and it's hugely rewarding.
When you're starting a class and you're getting to know the students, it can be really good to create a lot of opportunities for people to disclose their pronouns. Doing it verbally in front of the entire class when a person's just walked into the classroom and hasn't been able to build a trusting relationship with you as a teacher can be a little jarring for everyone. So if you can create a form where youth can fill out information that would be useful for them to share with you, you could have a little box that says, like, can I disclose this with the class? It's sort of up to you, but the more opportunities you create, the more a chance there is for a youth or a few youth to step up eventually when they're comfortable to say, these are my pronouns and this is what I would prefer.
You need training for teachers, for administrators, for school staff, for everyone. You also need to make sure that there are those other opportunities to sort of create that inclusion in the classroom. So that might mean including information in curriculum. It may mean actually the opportunity to write about social justice in your English class. My advice would be to continue to learn everything you can. There's a lot of great research and good ideas out there. The other thing is to listen to the kids.
I think that
So I thought that was just a little overview of the importance of continuing our learning around this topic, and also just what other districts have found that a policy has done for them. I just pulled out a couple things out of our current policy that I thought stood out for me. And the overarching idea, which really struck me, and this kind of summarizes the whole inclusion part of the SOGI policy, is all members of the school district have the right to expect that its policies, procedures, and communications are inclusive and respectful, taking into consideration of visible and invisible diversities, including, but not limited to, sexual orientation, gender identity, race, religion, ability, culture, and socioeconomic status. The Board of Education will promote a safe environment free from harassment and discrimination, and proactive strategies and guidelines to ensure that lesbian, gay, transgender, transsexual, two-spirit, bisexual, queer, and questioning students, LGBTQ+ students, employees and families are welcomed, included, and affirmed in all aspects of education and school life, and treated with respect and dignity. And that summarizes, I would say, the whole SOGI policy. And I just pulled out a couple of the other items because it's a very inclusive, extensive policy. But some of the things that jumped out and I just wanted to put in there so you have a sense of what the policy includes. Every student has the right to be addressed by name and pronoun that corresponds to their gender identity. School personnel are required to evaluate all gender-based procedures, routines, activities, rules, and ceremonies to ensure inclusive language and purpose. Trustees, management, and staff must model respect and affirmation of LGBTQ+ students and families, in part through participating in-service workshops on LGBTQ+ issues. Trustees, management, and staff have the responsibility for the addressing of homophobia and heterosexism in the working and learning environment. And I wanted to end with this picture. This is done also by one of our students when I was doing my research, where they feel they belong. And then this is a quote as well that came from a student in the district. And it was, "Wouldn't it be great if we didn't need the flags and the stickers so that all students belong and find safety in their schools? It's about feeling safe in our schools. That is what SOGI is all about." And that's the end.
Thank you very much. On
My
our agenda, it shows questions at the end, and I'm wondering if folks would be willing to hold their questions until after the mental health presentation, or if they would prefer to ask some of their questions now.
Excuse me, Michelle, I think it's a good idea if we keep the SOGI stuff together. And so that if there are questions now that people about the SOGI and SOGI policy, that people ask them now.
Okay, great. Are there any questions? Jason.
I'm just curious. I know when I worked at Vanier, the GSA club was one of the stronger and well-defined clubs at the school. But you said something about a rainbow club. Is there any examples of that in our district at the elementary level, or is it just mainly high school?
Right now, it's mainly high school.
Okay.
Yeah. And just to give you an idea too of numbers, and it's been interesting with COVID meeting online, how it's impacted different schools. So I know at the last meeting, there were 3 students at the GSA at Highland. At Vanier, they had about 8 students, and we just had our GSA meeting at Isfeld today, and we had 50 students. So one of the goals and looking and talking with the SOGI reps is, Jason, to look more at the elementary schools and how do we encourage that, the inclusion clubs and diversity clubs.
Thank you. Shannon, did you have your hand raised?
Yeah, I did. Thanks, Karma. That was really a great presentation. I'm curious, it sounds like you and Esther work closely together to kind of monitor what's going on in the district and gather information from other districts and that type of thing. Do you also, do you report back to the, is there an annual or a regular report back to the district to inform others about kind of further thoughts that you're having, other initiatives that you could bring in, or is that something that you kind of more do in a more insular way, kind of the two of you or with a smaller team?
So Shannon, all of the information that I gather at the network meetings across the island and working with all of the other districts from across the island comes back to the SOGI reps. And so I report out to every school's SOGI rep every time I've had a meeting, and that's every 2 months that we have them right now. But in the meantime as well, we try and get together depending on what the SOGI reps feel are needed at the schools. So that's the idea behind this network, is that every school has a representative, there's a district representative, and then that goes out to the island network. And then we also once a year have a meeting with all of the districts in BC. So that's how the information is shared right now. And then how those SOGI reps at each school share the information with their schools, that's they work with their GSAs or with their staff to share that information.
And can I also ask for clarification? Did you say there are 50 or 15?
Yeah, 50 today. There were 50
wow.
students. Yeah,
that's amazing.
Were grade 8s and 9s, which was really interesting, just watching this shift in culture and in inclusion. Yeah, it was amazing.
Do you find that attendance peters out, like as the kids get older? Like, is there any trend that you notice in terms of more of any given grade? And then that's my last question.
Well, it's been very different under COVID. Like I said, usually Highland has one of our biggest GSA gatherings, and that's gone down under COVID. So it just depends on the school itself. We've always had a range of students from all of the grades. This year in particular, it's standing out. Our younger students want to be involved.
Thank you. So I have Janice and then Sheila. I wasn't sure who put their hand up first, but I've recognized you both. So Janice.
Okay, thank you. I have two questions. One is, I know that when Vanier was retrofitted, it really did the neutral gender washrooms, but Isfeld and Highland are older schools. And I'm wondering, are the washrooms there meeting the needs of our students today, or is there something we have to look at for that? And the other one is, has there been a thought, I know some school districts do this, at doing the rainbow crosswalks entrance to our schools. I'm wondering if there's been a discussion or a thought of maybe doing that as supporting our students is something to consider. It's just I've noticed some districts have done that in support of the students. I'm wondering if we ever had that conversation in our end. Thanks.
Esther, do you want to answer the first question?
I'll answer. Both Highland and Isfeld are in discussion with our director of operations around gender neutral bathrooms. And so those discussions are happening, and we'll have to see what the results of those discussions are. So
Esther, can I just add to that? We
Sure.
do have a gender neutral washroom at the schools.
Yes.
It's a single stall gender neutral washroom. It's just with COVID, it means passing through the office. So it's not ideal, but it is there for all of our students.
I was just going to say that all of our schools, our middle school, Lake Trail, Cumberland, they all do have a washroom that is allocated as the gender neutral washroom.
Thank you.
The other question was,
Crosswalk.
It's about rainbow
crosswalks.
Mm-hmm.
What happens with our GSAs is that when students come up with ideas, and when those ideas have anything to do with funding, that's usually when I hear about it. And at this point, we have not had any group from any of our high schools request that we look into rainbow crosswalks at their schools. That hasn't come across my desk as yet. I don't know, Karma, if it's come across yours.
No, people have mentioned it, but the most I've heard about it is at the island networking meetings. And the biggest issue that comes up with those crosswalks is the maintenance costs and who is going to continually paint them, because they do wear off. It's really hard to keep them. So what most schools are actually looking at are creative ways of incorporating rainbows in their schools that aren't actually maybe a crosswalk, but they're maybe part of the stairs where they're not stepped on, or a doorway, or whatever it is. Yeah.
And just to touch on, that's what I hear through my island networks of trustees, is how do we support exactly what you're saying, Karma, is just how do we support that? And there is a financial cost, but there's also that maintenance cost on that one there. So, and I'm speaking for myself, but I'm sure the rest of my colleagues would say that anything that we can do to support the students, and I know there's a budgetary issues in there, but I think that we need to have that conversation and how we can support the students and just and celebrate them in our district.
Thank you.
Thanks. Sheila?
So I do know actually that Lake Trail had a rainbow crosswalk for a period of time, and exactly the wearing down, I'm not sure if it's still there, but that was an initiative at the school level. So I'm interested if you could speak a little bit about, so we have Cumberland, Lake Trail, Glacier View, and Nalatsi would be schools which would expect to see some kind of GSA activity, and whether those are there, and if there is, especially with COVID, being able to do some meetings on with Zoom, if that's a way to bring any of these together. And I'm also interested if you have a sense of the participation by the Straight Alliance people in this. I think that's a really, really important role, and I know that at various times, I think when Vanier was going through some issues and the Torn Rainbows process, and they had a peer support group developed, that a lot of the students' leaders were stepping up to be part of the GSA in a really positive way. And I think that's a really good thing if people are learning from each other and making the point painting that it's an issue for everybody. So how are we doing on those two issues? Our alternate programs, or our semi-high schools, and then the participation of all students?
So I know in particular Lake Trail is running GSAs in person, so in groups, and they have a 6-7 and an 8-9, and they've separated those two GSAs. Mm-hmm. I know Cumberland also was, I don't know this year, but I know in past years that they've had a very, very active GSA, and they hosted a number of our district meetings. And with Cumberland, it was interesting because they had some younger students who really wanted to be involved. And so we made sure that it was inclusive, and that all of our activities, then when we did those district meetups, were appropriate for everyone involved and inclusive. And so I know they're active there. Glacier View also has a very active, and they want to do more of the educational portion of the GSA. So some of them are just social groups. And then in terms of how are the straight allies involved, I know, Sheila, that it's not asked. You never have to disclose at a meeting if you're, you know, LGBTQ plus or not. So I think when you have a GSA, when you've got the flags, when you have teachers stepping up to put the stickers on their door and to be inclusive in their teaching, all of that is showing allyship. So I don't know what the split is, and having 50 students come out today is pretty amazing, and I would bet that there's a lot of people who are part of that group who are there to support and to find a place to belong.
That's really encouraging. That's, yeah, thanks. That's how it should be.
Thank you. Were there any other questions?
Tanya?
So everyone had dynamic questions. Mine's a more general question, just to keep us moving forward with language and pronouns, etc. What exactly do you mean by when you say twin-spirited?
So that's really interesting. It's actually two-spirit. And when I attended the summit,
two-spirit, sorry.
Yeah, and when I attended the summit this year, it was very eye-opening for me as well. So what I would recommend is doing, just looking it up online as well. There's some really excellent resources. I can forward them if you want, but just look up the definition of two-spirit. At the summit, there was a panel of different GSA sponsors and Indigenous education workers, and they talked about two-spirit as being not how we've traditionally defined it in sort of this colonial aspect, which is we're going to look at your gender and we're going to look at your sexuality, but it was more a piece of identity. And it was in each different situation, these people, when they asked the Indigenous people of the land they came from, they got similar, but a little bit different depending on where they were from, definitions. But really, it has to do with identity and place in the society. So it goes beyond our traditional definitions of gender or sexuality. And in the past, what I've heard it two-spirit described as is a specific role in society that in our colonial eyes would take on maybe gendered roles like feminine and masculine, but in that society itself, it was just seen as your role, and could be seen as super important role. So it's I think the more that we do and the more education we do around it, we just keep learning. So I think, Tanya, this is an excellent question, and I would encourage you to keep looking into it and ask the local Indigenous group what the definition would be here. What was the traditional definition?
Thank you.
So I just wanted to share, it's not so much a question, but it's an acknowledgement. And it was about 2.5 years ago, and I attended an event at Mark's Isfeld Secondary. I think I was a not yet sworn in trustee, but I went with a friend and her family who were working along a pathway with one of their children who was exploring or had made some realizations about their gender identity. And there were films and 2 transgender youth or young adults who shared their stories about their journey. And I left feeling so thankful that that our schools were providing space for not only for the students of our district, but for the families of our district. And there was a huge cross section of people that attended. and we need places for people to go to be able to have those conversations and safe spaces for them to go. And I was really honored to know that I was joining on as a trustee in a school district that was doing this kind of work. And so I just wanted to acknowledge the work that took place for that event and the lives that I know it touched, and all of the other work that probably many of us will never see in making a safe space and promoting allyship for all individuals of whatever path they choose to take.
Thanks.
So I hadn't really ever talked about that much with folks. I just wanted to share what I saw as an outsider, as in starting to be an insider in our district. So were there any last questions or comments before we move on to our presentation on mental health? Okay, Esther, over to you.
Okay. Jeff, can I just press?
You are good to go.
Uh-oh. I don't know what happened. It should be right there. There we are. Jeff, I'm going to press the button on the far right. Is that going to expand my screen? I can't hear you because you're muted. I'll just try. No, that's not it. No, that's not it.
If you expand the square.
Oh, it's gone now. There it is. How do I expand the square?
I don't know if you see my pointer, but you just put on the right next to the X at the top on the right.
Yes.
Where? Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Can everyone see it? Mental Health Update 2021. The reason that I wanted to have the SOGI information and the mental health information separate is because I don't want to ever convey the message that SOGI is a mental health issue. And so in my mind, these are very separate issues. There is a little bit of overlap, as we discussed, with the different statistics around the LGBTQ plus community. But all in all, when we talk about mental health and the mental health update, we're not focusing on SOGI. So it just happens to be that I'm very involved with both topics. So I'd like to start just by reminding you that mental health and well-being are bigger than just one person. They include every part of our lives, and that when people have the right tools and supports in place, they can flourish regardless of their health problems. When people don't have the support they need or are excluded, the community as a whole suffers. Our issue is that approximately 1 in 5 youth worldwide will experience a mental illness before they turn 25. This makes adolescence a critical time for mental health promotion, prevention, early identification, and intervention. Not addressing these issues leads to negative short and long-term outcomes. Mental health literacy is foundational for all mental health improvements. Now, we were fortunate that our board actually picked mental health as one of the strategic priorities. And so together, we've been focusing on mental health and well-being. And tonight, we'll give an update on what that is looking like for us. Our goal is for school mental health to improve mental health literacy among students, educators, and school staff. Mental health literacy is defined as understanding how to foster and maintain good mental health, understanding mental disorders and their treatments. Now, the ministry focus looks at school community mental health conferences, mental health grants, go-to educator training, pathway to hope, and compassionate systems leadership. Now, our group together has done quite a bit of work, and this is our timeline. And I think for most of the trustees, you've seen our timeline before. You know that we started with an environmental scan, which means we asked all schools, all principals and vice principals to submit to us what they were doing around mental health in their buildings. And then we attended the first mental health school community conference. We received a mental health grant from the Ministry of Education, and we were in the first group of school districts to receive that grant. In 2017, we established a steering committee, and on that committee, Karma, Caroline Gauthier, Jeff Manning, and Jeff Taylor. We attended the second annual Mental Health School Community Conference, and later that year, Karma, Caroline, and I went to a mental health curriculum, Train the Trainers at UBC, where we looked at Stan Kuchar's mental health curriculum. We brought that back to our school district and led a very solid day of curriculum training that also went from that day into other days so that our participants could really get a handle of the curriculum. We received another mental health grant and began to work and talk about a mental health literacy plan for our school district. And then COVID-19 happened. Our question at the forefront of the pandemic was, now, how do we best support our school community? Because what we knew was that people were afraid, people were isolated, many of our families were out of work, our children were anxious about leaving school and about returning to school. And the question then was, what would we do? What should we do? We needed to provide support, we needed to provide capacity building, and of course, we needed to maintain calm, safety, and kindness. In June, as you know, we returned to school, and our return to school plan, first of all, just as a reminder, we established a partnership with Lush Valley around food and food acquisition. We connected with families and generated a list of vulnerable students and families, and we maintained connections with those students and their families. We developed a very rich resource guide to help families navigate the support systems in our communities. When we talk about capacity building, the kinds of things that we did was we provided the mental health curriculum. It was made available to all counselors, youth and family support workers, EAs, admin assistants, teachers, and principals and vice principals. We had a session around trauma-informed practice and an online program that was also made available to those groups. We brought Kim Bartel in to meet with PVPs, staff, and parents in separate sessions. And we provided returning to school with a trauma-informed lens session from Safer Schools. We looked at a Compass mental health program from Children's Hospital and provided sessions for elementary and secondary teachers. We participated in the Compassionate Systems Leadership Program. And together we compiled a bank of useful websites, the Erase website, the Youth Mental Health website, Mental Health Canada, Canadian Mental Health Association of BC, Hand in Hand Parenting, and Anxiety Canada. When we returned to school in September, we knew that our students were anxious, our parents were anxious, the teachers were anxious, and therefore elementary counselors worked in collaboration to create a set of training sessions around the return to school and anxiety. The EASE program, which is a provincial program around anxiety, was made available to teachers, support staff, and parents, and supplemental EASE resources were made available to those schools where at least 5 staff members completed the course. And at this point, 10 schools have qualified for those extra resources. The LRC with Joan Pierce and Leanne Brennan Webster built mental health resource kits addressing various mental health topics for elementary students. The Student Services Low Incidence team created kindergarten startup kits for all of our kindergarten teachers. We provided sessions with Jody Carrington, Jennifer Mervin, and Catherine Leppinen. And we also provided the Inner Explore meditation program to all schools and classrooms that wanted it. In the late fall, we made the Assist Suicide Prevention program available to secondary and elementary counselors who had not received the training or who needed to update their training. With our federal funds, we added 0.5 to our outreach counselor. We added 0.5 FTE to our counseling department. We added 3 elementary youth and family program workers. We added 1 Indigenous youth and family program worker, and we added $50,000 to our mental health resources. We began a mental health district counselor Facebook page for our parents. Our district counselor has designed a District Counselor's Corner newsletter that comes out monthly to all of our parents. We have weekly girls groups. We have outreach work with families. We have mental health challenges, peer support programs, team-based supports for students. We have boys groups in partnership with John Howard. We have girls group. We have queer and allies clubs, leadership schools projects, peer leaders, Foundry Center Advisory Group, the Foundry Youth Peer Facilitation Group. Jack.org is still thriving at Vanier, and we have conducted sessions on substance abuse, self-esteem, anxiety, and depression. And on, we have established a mental health inquiry project program for our teachers, and so we have a number of inquiry projects coming. And if you can see that we have grade 8 and 9 leadership clubs, talking circles, healthy living leadership programs, board games clubs, Indigenous girls groups, soup making with Indigenous support workers, boys and girls club mentoring programs, school gardens, outdoor learning and playing spaces, knitting clubs, the EASE program, social emotional learning lessons for kindergarten students, mindfulness sessions, sessions on kindness, and sessions called Responding to Worry and Anxiety. That's just an example of the kinds of things that are happening in our school district. I asked each school to submit the kinds of things that they were doing, and this is just a smattering of what was submitted to me. And so for that reason, I really feel it's important that we acknowledge some of the heroes of COVID-19. And if you look at this slide, you see that it's important to acknowledge our elementary, secondary, and secondary counselors, our youth and family program workers, our educational assistants, our ISWs, our admin assistants, our classroom teachers, and our principals and vice principals. Because it's not lost on us that this has been a very difficult time, that it's not just our students and our families who are feeling heightened or feeling worried, but all of our employee groups are feeling the same thing. And we have been so fortunate that these groups have kind of put their own worries aside to make sure that our families and our students are healthy. So moving forward with our community partners, what will that look like around mental health? And of course, you've heard me bring up Pathways to Hope many, many times. I do have new information today that the program is still on its way, that we have now written a number of policies that have been accepted by all three ministries. And we will be working towards startup. And today they said startup would happen in the middle of June. So we'll see how that goes. But it's a huge deal for us to change the way we have been providing service in the Comox Valley. And we are working with our partners in Maple Ridge and our community partners to see that this service delivery model actually is viable and will work. The other news, of course, is news that we will be receiving a foundry, that the building is being renovated as we speak, and that the foundry folks are working really, really hard to have that up and running in time so that one of our community teams could be housed at the foundry. And the last thing in moving forward is really school district mental health literacy plan. The question is now, how do we implement a district-wide mental health initiative? How do we build capacity, competency, and confidence in teachers so that they can deliver a mental health literacy curriculum to improve the outcomes of our students? So that's the update. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Esther. That
I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you. Then we can see each other. So questions. My mind is still absorbing all of that information.
Well, I didn't have 60 slides, so.
Just used really teeny font.
There's a lot to get on a slide.
Janice and then Sheila.
So I guess my question is, and I know our district is doing great work, and I appreciate all the hard work that Esther and her staff are doing to support our students. But sometimes those students need more than something that we can offer. And quite often I hear is that the waiting time outside of the district is quite long, and it has a really negative impact on our students. And I'm wondering through the Director of Instructions, Esther, and that, is there anything that we can do to maybe assist or help to ensure that those students that need the help? And I know that our association has a mental health advocacy group that works with the ministry on that. But I'm hearing that quite often there is a gap between the time a student is identified needing help and getting that help. And sometimes there are some there's some sad consequences for that. And I'm just wondering, Esther, is there anything that we can do to support our students above and beyond the excellent work and the great hard work that you're doing to maybe close that gap in that time frame, ensuring that those kids that need help when they need it get it, and they're not sort of stuck on a waiting list and trying to get some help whenever there's a spot open up in the with the lack of abilities in the public.
You're right, Janice, that there are some gaps in wait lists, and there are wait lists for kids to get some support from outside agencies. And I think how the school district has responded to that, because we're all at work, and what we know about MCFD is that a lot of our social workers and our community partners and other agencies are still working from home and are not in their buildings yet. What we do is beef up our work with children and families, and that's what we've done, is to do the very best work that we can without putting added pressure on our community partners while they work through what they need to work through around COVID-19. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what it would look like if you were to pressure our community partners at this time, but that would, I suppose that would be up to you.
Well, it's not so much pressuring them, it's just to make it, just to acknowledge the fact that there is that gap and there is consequences, because sometimes we don't talk about mental health, we don't talk about the reality on that. It's one of those, over the many years, I mean, up until a couple of years ago, let's be honest, mental health was one of those things we did not talk about in schools. We didn't admit that our children had anxiety. We didn't admit that our students were suffering from mental illness. And we are now starting to talk about it. And I think the more we talk about it and the more we acknowledge the fact that our students are suffering and there is a gap in how we want to do the best we can in our end, but yet there's still that hole to fill, and just having that conversation to me is the most important. I don't believe lobbying and enforcing them. You can't do that. But I think continuing the dialogue and then acknowledging that there is a gap and some of our students are slipping through the holes. And as a result of that gap, they're in harm's way in many ways. So that's my thought, is just, let's continue the dialogue, acknowledge there's a problem. Don't be afraid to say, hey, you know what, this is not perfect, because it's not perfect. It's better than it was 3 years, better than 5 years. We are a long way from supporting all our students, and just being honest and upfront that we need a lot more work to do. That was that point of the conversation.
Well, then certainly I would support you in continuing the conversation. Absolutely.
Sheila? Yeah, I think to the extent that yeah, I agree with Janice. We do know, and you know, we've had a few conversations about some of our students who the complexity of their case at more advanced stages is very, very difficult to respond. And we see increasing resources in a number of different places, but outcomes for the students that are for young people that are at a point of engaging with the hospital psychiatric services is not to this point been good. But I see lots of improvements. I see that the community agencies working together, and I know that your team are quite involved in the Comox Valley Children and Youth Matters. That's a network, and it's been very instrumental in supporting the Foundry, and it kind of parallels how the Pathways of Hope work that you're doing is going. And I really feel lots of positives will come out of that network, will come out of the parent support for parents. It's coming out of bringing the whole trauma-informed service right into doctors, physicians' offices. So I think, Janice, we probably could do some more lobbying to the government to increase resources, but we're in a really positive period right now, and that's coming. I just want to thank you, Esther, you and the team, for everything you outlined. I mean, when we see it there, it's huge what you've been doing. I can only think that it's been, you know, instrumental in keeping you out of mischief for the last couple of years. you have hardly had any time to breathe in terms of everything that you've been doing and working with so many partners to respond, to put services in place. And I think what I really like is that I see a lot of upstream work. I see a lot of preventive work, the programming that we do in the schools and outreach to families and increasing resources and right from that early years collaborative, getting supports in there to identify and address those needs long before they become the types of crises that that bring us so much grief. So tons and tons of work done, and Janice is right that there are still kids falling through the cracks, but I know that you're all doing your best, and that's where we can try and support that those gaps get fewer and farther between. Just, yeah, it's so important, and I am just absolutely blown away when I see that whole list of how everybody is starting to think from the same lens of how are kids doing. And I think that approach to COVID too, that you know, as people were freaking out about whether the kids are you know, missing a math worksheet, and the emphasis on just making sure that they were feeling safe and comfortable and supported was an initiative, and you have done a brilliant job all the way through. Thank you.
I just wanted to bring up too that we received, and I glossed over this in the PowerPoint, but we did receive our McCreary report results. They're results from 2018. And when we talk about COVID-19, those results don't really have a bearing on what's happening with our school community right now. But as we get through this year, we will start to review those results again, and those results will start to inform our practice. And then we look forward to the next McCreary report, which will include the byproduct of COVID-19. And so that will be very informational to us.
Any more questions? Shannon?
I was curious about that last comment. First of all, Esther, thank you. That was a really very thorough presentation. And I'll probably write you a follow-up email to ask if I could get a couple of the slides that present all the long lists of things that I can bring that back to DPAC. But in terms,
you don't want my picture of the virus?
I've seen way too many pictures of that virus. Does for the McCreary report, does that get broken down into regions and then provided to each region? And
yeah.
So how large is our region? Would it be our district?
It's the North Island Health region, which is the same as our COVID-19 region.
Okay. That's really interesting. Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Jeff?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Esther kind of glossed over this. It was her third or fourth slide. And I just wanted to congratulate the trustees for making mental health part of your strategic priorities and actually embedded in your strategic plan. And you know, Janice had said that this was something that wasn't talked about in the past. Well, you guys made it the forefront and made it an initiative, and that's really helped with this issue. So I just wanted to commend you for that, and thank you for making that part of your plan.
Thanks. Thank you, Jeff. Thanks for acknowledging and raising that point. Anybody else? No. Okay. Well, two very say critical areas of the work that's done in our district to support, I would say to support everybody in the district and for reaching out into our communities as well. And I want to thank Karma and Esther for pulling the information together, creating the slides with the data, and walking us through it. And I know it's just a snapshot of layers and layers and layers of work that's being done throughout the district. So thank you both for accepting our request to provide us information to help to educate us more.
So at this point, Michelle, if you're okay, would you like me to stop the recording as we move on to the...
Almost, yeah. One of the things I wanted to ask is, we're always looking for ideas for topics for the Education Committee. And so if you can think of some now, please share. But if you ever think of any, either let let's say Jeff or myself know topics that I would say that the trustees and our partner groups should learn more information on and about programs or topics within our district. Sometimes a presentation like this will spark an idea or a thought. So I just wanted to put it on the in the Zoom. I was going to say put it on the table, but I guess we're not all at the same table. Well, we are, but virtually. So seeing none. So were there any other comments on the meeting tonight? The next meeting is April the 13th for the Education Committee. And seeing a lot of mute buttons on. Jeff, if you want to, close this portion or stop the recording of the meeting,
Sure.
that would be great.
You bet.
Thank you.